He came to the mountains to bury the past, but the past has a nasty habit of clawing its way out of the snow. Cole Hendricks wanted silence. What he found in Blackwood Ridge was a town holding its breath and a syndicate holding the leash. It started with a simple desire for a warm meal and ended with a war. When the local enforcers cornered him in the diner and threatened his dog, they thought they were pressing a desperate drifter. They didn't realize they were stepping on a live landmine. Cole didn't answer their threats with a shout. He answered with a movement so fast the room missed it. Because sometimes peace isn't found in walking away. It's found in drawing a line in the snow that evil isn't allowed to cross. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. Cole Hendricks didn't roll into Blackwood Ridge looking for a parade. He arrived like the blizzard chasing his tailgate, relentless, cold, and blinding. His pickup truck was a dark shadow against the whiteout, tires churning through sludge that threatened to swallow the axles. The heater rattled in the dash, fighting a losing battle against a frost that seemed determined to crack the windshield. The digital clock flickered, dying and coming back to life, marking time in a place that felt like it had run out of it. Cole's hands on the wheel were scarred maps of bad places, knuckles white not from the cold but from habit. He was 6'2", built with the heavy, dense muscle of a man who moved heavy things for a living. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a dark cap and the collar of a jacket that had seen too many winters. It was a face carved from patience and regret, the skin wind-burned and tight over the jaw. His eyes were the most dangerous thing about him. They didn't look, they assessed. Sector scan. Threat assessment. It wasn't paranoia, it was muscle memory carved into his bones by years of hunting in the dark. Beside him, alert on the passenger seat, sat the only soul Cole allowed inside his perimeter. Gunnar. A German shepherd with a coat like burnt toast and shadows. He wasn't a pet, he was a retired weapons system with a heartbeat. Gunnar sat with the stillness of a statue, but his ears swiveled like radar dishes, dissecting the howling wind for the snap of a twig or the crunch of a boot. His eyes, intelligent and amber-hard, watched the treeline with the intensity of a soldier who knows the difference between silence and an ambush. Gunnar wasn't looking for squirrels. He was looking for targets. The town emerged from the white haze like a graveyard shift nightmare. Blackwood Ridge looked like a place the world had muted. The general store was boarded up. The streetlights were dead eyes on rusted poles. But there, cutting through the gloom, was the diner. The red neon sign buzzed with an angry, electric hum, bleeding crimson light onto the piled snow. Diner. It looked less like a sanctuary and more like a warning flare burning in the middle of a frozen ocean. The snow covered the streets in a clean sheet, a liar's blanket, hiding the decay and the tire tracks of men who owned this town by force. Cole slowed at the intersection. He expected to see life, a shovel scraping pavement, a car passing by. But the sidewalks were tombs. The town stared back, unblinking. Gunnar shifted. A low rumble vibrated in the dog's chest, subsonic, felt rather than heard. It wasn't a growl of aggression, it was a frequency of warning. Contact front. Cole glanced at the dog. Easy, he whispered. Gunnar didn't relax. His hackles rose. Cole felt that familiar click deep in his gut, the switch flipping from man to operator. He hated it. He had come here to stop living with his finger on the trigger. He had come here to disappear. But his body still moved like it was answering orders from a command post that no longer existed. Cole drove past the dark alleys and pulled into the diner's lot, the only patch of light for miles. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. Cole opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit him like a physical blow, freezing the breath in his lungs. Gunnar dropped onto the snow with a soft thud, instantly sweeping the area, nose down, eyes up. Cole watched the red neon light reflect in the dog's dark eyes. He looked at the diner window, steamed up and glowing, then at the empty street where shadows seemed to move with intent. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the ghost of a rifle that wasn't there. "Let's eat," Cole murmured, his voice rough. But as they walked toward the red glow, the snow crunching loudly under his boots, Cole knew they weren't just walking into a meal. They were walking into a trap. And he was bringing the teeth. The wind didn't howl in Blackwood Ridge. It screamed, a high, thin sound like metal tearing against metal. Cole Hendricks steered his battered pickup through the whiteout, the tires fighting for purchase on a road that had surrendered to the storm hours ago. The heater in the dash wheezed one last, pathetic breath of lukewarm air and died. Cole didn't curse. He didn't shiver. He just tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles standing out like ridgelines on a topographic map. He was used to the cold. The cold was honest. It told you exactly what it was going to do to you: slow you down, numb you out, kill you if you stopped moving. It was the heat he didn't trust anymore. The heat of the desert, the heat of the muzzle flash, the heat of blood. Beside him, Gunnar sat rigid in the passenger seat. The German shepherd didn't pant or whine. He braced himself against the sway of the truck, his amber eyes fixed on the swirling snow beyond the windshield. Gunnar was 75 pounds of tactical intelligence wrapped in fur the color of a burnt fuse. He wasn't looking at the storm, he was looking through it. The town emerged from the gloom like a shipwreck revealed by a receding tide. First came the skeletal remains of a gas station, pumps hooded in ice. Then the boarded-up windows of a hardware store that looked like it hadn't sold a hammer in a decade. There were no Christmas lights, no welcoming wreaths. Blackwood Ridge was a place where people came to hide or to die, or to wait for something that was never coming back. "End of the line, buddy," Cole murmured. His voice sounded rusty and used. Gunnar's ears flicked, acknowledging the command, but his gaze didn't waver. Cole killed the engine in the only plowed lot on Main Street. The silence that rushed in was heavy, pressurized, ringing in his ears louder than the engine had. He sat there for a long minute, letting the adrenaline of the drive settle into the dull ache of existence. He was tired. Not sleep-deprived tired, soul-tired. The kind of exhaustion that settles in the marrow and makes gravity feel twice as strong. He opened the door and the blizzard punched him in the chest. He stepped out, boots crunching into the hard-packed drift, and pulled his collar up. Gunnar dropped down beside him, silent as a shadow, instantly sweeping the perimeter. "Left, right, check 6. They stood there, a man and his dog, ghosts in jackets that had seen too many winters. Ahead of them, the only living thing in the town pulsed with an aggressive energy. The diner. The neon sign buzzed with a frantic electrical hum, spelling out diner in a bleeding red glow that stained the falling snow crimson. It was a violent splash of color in a world of gray and white. The image before him was stark. The large plate glass windows were steamed up, glowing from the inside, promising warmth, grease, and coffee. But to Cole, the light didn't look inviting. It looked like exposure. In the dark, you were safe. In the dark, nobody knew you were there until it was too late. Stepping into that light meant becoming a target. It meant eyes on you. It meant questions. Where you from? Where you headed? Why do you look like you're waiting for the roof to cave in? Cole hesitated. He stood at the edge of the illumination, the snow piling on his shoulders, watching the red letters reflect on the wet pavement. He checked the street again. Empty. Too empty. The hairs on the back of his neck, the ones that had saved his life in Kandahar and sleepless nights in safe houses, began to prickle. Gunnar felt it too. The dog wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the shadows between the buildings. A low vibration started in the dog's chest, a growl that wasn't audible but could be felt through the soles of Cole's boots. "I know," Cole whispered, his breath clouding in the red light. "I don't like it either." But the cold was biting through his layers now, finding the old shrapnel scars in his shoulder. They couldn't stay out here. He needed coffee. He needed to thaw the ice in his veins, even if just for an hour. He took a step toward the light, his silhouette casting a long, distorted shadow against the diner wall. He reached for the door handle, the metal biting into his glove. Through the fog glass he saw movement. Not the casual movement of a cook flipping burgers, but something jagged. Quick. The posture of men who weren't there to eat. Cole paused, his hand hovering inches from the glass. He shouldn't go in. Every instinct screamed at him to get back in the truck and drive until the fuel ran dry. But then he saw the shadow of a waitress back away from a table, her body language screaming fear, and the decision was made for him. He pushed the door open, and the bell above it jingled, a cheerful, innocent sound that announced the arrival of the only thing in Blackwood Ridge more dangerous than the storm. The door swung shut behind them, severing the scream of the wind with a heavy, final thud. The silence that followed wasn't the peace of shelter. It was the sudden, suffocating quiet of a room that had just stopped breathing. The warmth hit Cole first, a wall of heat thick with the smell of stale coffee, frying onions, and damp wool. It should have been welcoming, a reprieve from the biting frost outside. Instead, it felt oppressive, like the air in a submarine before the depth charges start falling. Cole stomped the snow from his boots, the sound echoing like a gunshot on the linoleum floor. Beside him, Gunnar shook his coat, sending a spray of melted ice across the entryway mat, his claws clicking a sharp rhythm as he regained his footing. Nobody moved. There were maybe a dozen people in the diner. Three old men in trucker caps huddled over mugs at the counter, their spines curved in permanent submission. A couple in a booth near the window, staring intently at their untouched plates as if the secrets of the universe were written in the gravy. And then there was the corner. The back booth was occupied by four men who took up too much space. They wore heavy Carhartt jackets and the kind of boots that were used to kicking things that were already down. They weren't eating, they were holding court. Their laughter, which had been loud enough to hear through the glass a moment ago, had been sliced off the second Cole walked in. Now they were just watching. The social temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees below the blizzard outside. Cole kept his face neutral, the gray man mask he'd perfected over a decade of blending into places he wasn't welcome. He didn't look directly at the corner booth. Direct eye contact was a challenge and he wasn't ready to start the clock just yet, but his peripheral vision mapped them instantly. 4 tangos. Heavy build. Intoxicated. No visible firearms but likely carrying blades. The one on the left has a reach advantage. The one in the middle is the shot caller. He moved toward a small two-top table near the wall. It was strategic, back protected, clear line of sight to the door and the corner booth. He unzipped his jacket but didn't take it off. Under, Cole whispered. Gunner slid beneath the table seamlessly, curling into a tight ball where he could see everything but remain unseen. Only the tip of his black nose and the amber glint of his eyes remained visible in the shadows of the tablecloth. A waitress appeared from the kitchen. She was young, maybe early 20s, with hair pulled back in a messy bun and an apron that had seen better days. She hurried toward him, wiping her hands on a rag, her eyes darting nervously toward the back corner. She didn't look like she was coming to take an order. She looked like she was coming to deliver a warning. "Coffee," Cole said before she could speak, his voice low. "Black. And water for the dog." The waitress froze for a split second, her gaze flickering to the floor where Gunner lay. She swallowed hard. "Sir," she whispered, the pot in her hand trembling just enough to make the liquid inside dance. We're about to close. The roads are bad. You should keep moving." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a plea. "Roads are gone," Cole said, picking up the laminated menu without looking at it. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." From the corner booth, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound was deliberate, a jagged tear in the silence. "Hey, darlin'," a voice boomed from the back. It was wet, heavy, and slurred. "Who said you could stop pouring? My cup's dry." The waitress flinched as if she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. She looked at Cole, her eyes wide with a frantic, silent message. "Don't make this worse." Cole didn't move. He didn't turn around. He just stared at the salt shaker in the center of the table, feeling the familiar, cold electricity start to hum in his nerves. The switch was rattling in its cage. "I'll be right there, Silas," she called back, her voice cracking. "You better be," the man named Silas replied. His voice dropped an octave, losing the fake cheer and finding the raw edge of a threat. "And tell your stray dog friend that the booth he's sitting in is reserved for friends of the family. He looks like he's lost." The diner went dead silent again. The old men at the counter hunched lower. The couple by the window stopped breathing. Under the table, Gunner let out a sound. It wasn't a bark. It was a low, resonant thrum that vibrated against Cole's shin, the sound of a tectonic plate shifting just before the earthquake hits. Cole slowly lifted his gaze from the salt shaker. He turned his head, just an inch, just enough to catch the reflection of the room in the darkened window. He saw the waitress backing away, terrified. He saw the men in the corner leaning forward, predator smiles spreading across their faces. And he saw Silas, the biggest of them, reach out and grab the waitress's wrist as she tried to pass. The sound of Silas's grip tightening on the waitress's wrist was audible only to two living things in the room, Cole and Gunner. To everyone else it was just a drunk man being handsy. To Cole it was the click of a safety being disengaged. "I said let go," the waitress gasped, pulling back, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Silas didn't let go. He yanked her harder, pulling her off balance until her hips slammed into the edge of his booth. "And I said pour," he sneered, his eyes glassy and mean. "You got ears, don't you? Or do I need to twist them to make 'em work?" Under the table, the low thrumming vibration in Gunner's chest spiked into a snarl that sounded like ripping canvas. Cole didn't look up from the salt shaker. "Let her go." The words were soft, spoken with the flat effect of a man reading a grocery list, but they cut through the diner's humidity like a razor. Silas froze. The smile didn't leave his face, but it curdled into something ugly. He slowly released the waitress, who scrambled back toward the kitchen, clutching her wrist. Silas turned his heavy head toward Cole, his neck cracking. The three men with him stood up in unison, a choreographed wave of intimidation that had worked on everyone else in this town for years. "You talking to me, Drifter?" Silas asked, stepping out of the booth. He was big, 6'4", corn-fed, and carrying the kind of weight that hits like a sledgehammer. "I'm talking to the silence," Cole said, finally looking up. His gray-blue eyes were empty of fear, empty of anger. They were just absent. "Sit down. Finish your meal. Go home." Silas laughed, a wet, hacking sound. He walked toward Cole's table, his boots thudding heavy on the floor. His crew fanned out, closing the distance, blocking the exit. "I think you're confused about how things work in Blackwood, boy. You don't give orders here. You pay tolls." Silas reached for the collar of Cole's jacket. "Now stand up so I can." The movement happened in the space between heartbeats. Cole didn't stand up. He didn't wind up. He simply ceased to be a man sitting at a table and became a blur of kinetic energy. As Silas's hand reached out, Cole's left hand shot up, trapping the man's wrist. With a sickening pop, he twisted the joint against its natural rotation. Silas screamed, his knees buckling, but Cole was already moving. He used the leverage of the broken wrist to yank Silas down, slamming the man's face into the laminate table with a sound like a gunshot. The ketchup bottle exploded, spraying red across the window. The second man, a bearded heavy on the right, swung a wild haymaker. Cole didn't even look at him. He ducked under the swing, pivoted on his heel, and drove an elbow backward into the man's solar plexus. The air left the man's lungs in a wheezing shriek, and he folded like a cheap lawn chair. "Gunner, hold." Cole barked as the dog surged from beneath the table, teeth bared. Gunner froze, holding the perimeter, a snarling barrier between the fight and the terrified patrons. The third man hesitated, seeing his boss face down on a table and his friend gasping for air on the floor. But the fourth man, younger and stupider, pulled a jagged buck knife from his belt and lunged. Cole didn't retreat. He stepped into the blade. He caught the attacker's forearm mid-thrust, his grip like a steel trap. He drove his knee into the man's thigh, deadening the leg, then twisted the arm until the knife clattered to the floor. With a fluid, almost bored motion, Cole swept the man's legs out from under him. The attacker hit the floor hard, and before he could scramble up, Cole stepped on his chest, applying just enough pressure to keep him pinned. It was over in 6 seconds. The diner was silent. Not the awkward silence from before, but the terrified, ringing silence of a bomb site. Silas groaned on the table, blood streaming from his nose, mixing with the spilled ketchup. The man on the floor wheezed, clutching his chest. The knife lay spinning slowly near the counter. Cole stood in the center of the carnage, his breathing steady, his pulse barely elevated. He adjusted his jacket, which hadn't even come unzipped. He looked at the waitress, who was pressing herself against the soda machine, eyes wide as saucers. "Check, please," Cole said softly. But as he reached for his wallet, the lights in the diner flickered. What? Twice. Then the hum of the refrigerator died. The neon sign outside buzzed and went dark. The only light left came from the headlights of a truck idling across the street, a truck that hadn't been there a minute ago. Cole looked out the window, past the groaning men, to the storm raging outside. The phone on the wall behind the counter began to ring, a shrill, mechanical scream in the dark. "Don't answer that," Cole said to the waitress, his voice dropping to a command frequency. He watched the truck outside rev its engine, black smoke pouring into the white snow. "We aren't done yet." The silence in the diner shattered as the man on the floor gasped, sucking air into bruised lungs with a wet, desperate wheeze. Silas Vance, the man who treated this town like his personal fiefdom, rolled onto his side, clutching his shattered wrist. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by the feral, wide-eyed shock of a predator that had just realized it was prey. "Get up," Cole said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command hit the room with the weight of a gavel. Silas stumbled to his feet, his face a mask of blood and fury. He leaned heavily against the booth, spitting a tooth onto the linoleum. The two men who could still walk scrambled to help him, their eyes darting between Cole and the German shepherd that stood like a statue of judgment by the door. "You're dead," Silas rasped, his voice thick. He stared at Cole, memorizing his face. "You hear me? You in the mud. You don't walk out of these mountains." "I'm not walking," Cole replied, his voice flat. "I'm waiting. Now get out before I break the other one." Silas didn't need to be told twice. He shoved his way toward the door, his goons dragging the fourth man, the one with the limp leg, behind them. They spilled out into the snow, a chaotic tangle of curses and pain. The moment the door swung shut, the wind howled into the room, swirling napkins off the counter before the latch clicked. Cole didn't relax. He moved instantly to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. Outside, the truck that had been idling revved its engine. High beams cut through the blizzard, illuminating the retreating men as they piled into the cab. The truck didn't drive away immediately. It sat there, a hulking beast in the whiteout, its exhaust pumping gray smoke into the storm. Then, slowly, it backed up and disappeared into the dark. They weren't leaving. They were regrouping. Cole turned back to the room. The diner was a tomb. The three old men at the counter were frozen, coffee cups halfway to their mouths. The couple by the window looked ready to bolt. The waitress, trembling so hard her apron shook, was staring at the blood on the floor. "Is there a back door?" Cole asked, his eyes locking onto the older man behind the grill, the owner. The man blinked, shaking himself out of the stupor. He was balding with a face that looked like crumpled paper. "Why, through the kitchen. Delivery in trance." "Lock it," Cole ordered. "Now." The owner hesitated, his gaze drifting to the front window. "Mister, you just broke Silas Vance's arm. His brother runs the Iron Sons. They'll burn this place down with us inside." "They're going to try," Cole said, walking over to the front door. He threw the deadbolt and tested it. It was solid brass, old but heavy. He dragged a heavy oak table from a nearby booth and wedged it under the handle. "That's why we need to secure the perimeter." "Secure the?" The waitress stammered. "We need to call the sheriff." "Phone's dead," Cole said, nodding at the receiver hanging off the wall. "And even if it wasn't, nobody is getting up that mountain road in this weather. Not the sheriff. Not the Stoddies." He walked to the center of the room, Gunner pacing at his heel. Cole looked at the faces around him. 6 civilians, terrified, soft, and utterly unprepared for what was coming. He wasn't just a drifter anymore. He was the platoon commander, and this diner was his forward operating base. "Listen to me," Cole said, pitching his voice to cut through their panic. "That truck didn't leave to get help. It went to get reinforcements. The storm has the pass blocked. We are on an island. If you go out there, you freeze or they pick you off. Inside we have heat, we have food, and we have walls." He looked at the owner. "What's your name?" "Lou," the man whispered. "Lou, I need you to kill the main lights. Leave the emergency strips only. We're fish in a barrel if we stay lit up like a Christmas tree." Lou nodded, scrambling toward the fuse box behind the counter. "Waitress," Cole turned to the girl. "Get everyone away from the windows. Move them to the kitchen hallway. It's the most fortified structure in the building." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she moved. Fear was a motivator if you gave it a direction. The lights clanked off, plunging the diner into a gray, shadowy gloom. The only illumination now came from the faint, eerie glow of the snow outside and the red embers of the grill. Cole moved back to the window, keeping his body pressed against the wall to avoid silhouetting himself. He watched the darkness. Gunner sat beside him, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, picking up frequencies human ears couldn't touch. The wind battered the glass, a constant, shrieking reminder of their isolation. But it wasn't the wind that made the hair on Cole's arms stand up. "He sees something," Cole whispered to himself, watching Gunner's hackles rise. Far down the road, at the edge of the tree line where the forest met the town, a single pair of headlights flicked on. Then another. Then a third. They sat there in the distance, unmoving, like the eyes of wolves gathering at the edge of a campfire. "They're not waiting for the storm to stop," Cole realized, his hand drifting to the knife in his pocket. "They're coming through it." Then the power to the entire block died and the diner went pitch black. The darkness didn't fall, it slammed shut. One moment, the diner was a gray box of shadows and fear. The next, it was a void. The hum of the refrigerator died with a sputtering cough, leaving a silence so sudden it felt like the air pressure had dropped. The only sound left was the blizzard clawing at the siding, 1,000 icy fingernails trying to scratch their way in. Someone screamed, a short, sharp sound that was immediately swallowed by the gloom. "Stay down," Cole's voice cut through the black. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat, localized transmission that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Don't move. Don't run. Stay exactly where you are." For the civilians, the darkness was blinding. For Cole, it was a familiar neighborhood. His pupils dilated, his breathing slowed, and his brain shifted gears. He didn't need to see the room to know it. He had already mapped it. The counter was 3 steps to his left. The booth with the terrified couple was 4 meters at his 2 o'clock. The door was the fatal funnel. "Gunner," Cole whispered. "Watch." A low, affirmative chuff came from the floor. Gunnar was already moving, his claws clicking softly as he patrolled the perimeter. To the dog, the darkness changed nothing. If anything, it made the scent of the enemy sharper. Cole moved. He didn't stomp. He flowed, rolling his feet from heel to toe to silence his boots. He reached the panicked couple first. He could smell their fear, acrid and sharp, like burning copper. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and the guy nearly jumped out of his skin. "Easy," Cole said, keeping his voice low. "They cut the power to flush us out. If you panic, you do their work for them. Move to the kitchen hallway. Keep your heads down. Go." He guided them by touch, his grip firm but reassuring. He herded the waitress and the old men next. The kitchen hallway was a fatal funnel for anyone coming in, but a bunker for anyone already there. It had brick walls on two sides and no windows. "Lou," Cole called out softly. "You got a flashlight?" Under the counter, the owner stammered from the dark. "Leave it," Cole ordered. "Do not turn it on. Light attracts bullets. Right now we're invisible. As long as we're dark, they have to guess where we are. If you turn on a light, you give them a target." He crouched next to the waitress, Sarah, her name tag said. She was shivering, hugging her knees against her chest. Cole crouched beside her, not as a soldier, but as a man who knew what it was like to be small in a big war. "Hey," he said. The moonlight reflecting off the snow outside cast a pale, ghostly blue illumination through the front windows, just enough to outline his jaw. "Look at the dog." Sarah looked. Gunnar was sitting by the front door, statue still, his silhouette a jagged cutout against the snowy glass. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. "He's not scared," Cole said. "And he knows more about what's happening out there than any of us. As long as he's calm, you're safe. If he moves, I move. You just breathe. Can you do that?" Sarah took a ragged breath and nodded. Yeah, I can breathe." "Good." Cole stood up, his knees popping slightly. "Because Silas Vance thinks he just trapped us in the dark. He doesn't know that the dark is where I do my best work." He moved back to the front of the diner, blending into the shadows of the booth nearest the door. He watched the street. The heavy snow acted as a diffuser, scattering the ambient light into a hazy, blue-gray luminescence. He could see the shapes of the buildings across the street. He could see the tire tracks filling up with snow. And then Gunnar's ears snapped back. The dog didn't growl this time. He just stood up, his body turning rigid, his nose pointing not at the front door but toward the kitchen, toward the back. Cole felt the adrenaline spike, cold and efficient. The front was a distraction. They were probing the rear. "Lou," Cole whispered, drawing the knife from his pocket, the blade catching a sliver of the ghostly light. "You said that back door is steel?" "Wood," Lou whispered back, the terror rising in his voice. "Solid oak, but it's just wood." Cole turned, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the pitch-black maw of the kitchen. Above the sound of the wind, he heard it, the faint metallic scratch of a lockpick testing the tumblers, followed by the heavy, muffled thud of a shoulder testing the hinges. The scratching at the back door stopped, replaced by a heavy, rhythmic thudding. They weren't picking the lock anymore, they were kicking it in. Cole moved into the kitchen, the darkness thick and smelling of cold grease and sanitizing fluid. He didn't rush. Rushing made you clumsy, and in the dark, clumsy got you dead. He signaled Gunnar with a sharp hand motion. The dog understood instantly, crouching low beside the stainless steel prep table, his body coiled like a spring, eyes fixed on the vibrating door frame. "Lou," Cole whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The fire extinguisher. By the hood. Pass it." The owner, huddled in the dry storage alcove, slid the heavy red canister across the floor. It rolled to Cole's feet with a metallic clank. Cole grabbed it, then reached up to the spice rack above the prep station. His hand found what he was looking for, the industrial-sized tub of cayenne pepper. He wasn't going to shoot them. Not yet. A gunshot was a declaration of war that couldn't be unsigned. Tonight he wanted them to hurt. He wanted them to be afraid. He unscrewed the cap of the cayenne tub and dumped a pile of the red powder into his palm, then poured a slick of vegetable oil right at the threshold of the door. "Wait for it," Cole murmured to Gunnar. The dog's lip curled, a silent snarl revealing white teeth in the gloom. Thud. The wood cracked. Thud. The jam splintered. With a final, splintering crash, the heavy oak door flew open. The blizzard roared into the kitchen, a vortex of snow and wind. 2 flashlight beams cut through the dark, blinding and erratic. "Clear left," a voice shouted. "Get inside, get the—" The lead man stepped onto the oil slick. His boot went out from under him as if the floor had vanished. He went down hard, his head cracking against the floor tiles, his flashlight spinning away into the corner. Gunnar hit. The command was the trigger. Gunnar launched himself from the shadows, a blur of fur and muscle. He didn't bark. He hit the second man in the chest with the force of a battering ram. The man screamed, dropping his flashlight as 75 pounds of German Shepherd drove him back out into the snow. Gunnar stood over him, jaws snapping inches from the man's throat, a primal demon in the swirling white. The first man, dazed on the floor, tried to scramble up. He reached for something in his belt. Cole stepped out of the dark. He didn't look like a man, he looked like a shadow with mass. He kicked the man's hand away, hearing the crunch of fingers, then unleashed the cayenne pepper. He threw the powder directly into the man's face, then triggered the fire extinguisher. The blast of chemical retardant hit the man point blank. Between the blinding pepper in his eyes and the suffocating white cloud of the extinguisher, the man shrieked, clawing at his face, all thoughts of violence replaced by the desperate need for air. "Get out!" Cole snarled, grabbing the man by his collar and hurling him through the open doorway, right on top of his partner. Gunnar backed up, still facing the enemy, teeth bared, daring them to move. The two enforcers stumbled into the snow, coughing, retching, and blinded, scrambling away into the storm like children waking up from a nightmare. Cole slammed the door shut. The lock was busted, the frame shattered. He grabbed the heavy stainless steel prep table and dragged it across the floor, the metal legs screeching against the tile, wedging it firmly against the door. "Good boy," Cole breathed, reaching down to touch Gunnar's head. The dog leaned into his hand for a second, then immediately turned back to the door, ears pricked. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the howling wind and the terrified breathing of Lou in the corner. Cole checked the extinguisher gauge. Half empty. He wiped the cayenne dust from his hands. They had held the line. But as Cole looked at the shattered door frame, he knew this was just the probe. They had tested the defenses and found teeth. Next time they wouldn't send two goons with flashlights. They would send something that couldn't be stopped by pepper and a dog. From the front of the diner, Sarah's voice drifted back, trembling and high. "Cole? There's a voice outside. He's calling your name." Cole walked back into the main room, the adrenaline cooling into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He moved to the window, peering through the slats. The storm had momentarily thinned, and standing in the middle of the street, illuminated by the headlights of 3 trucks, was a figure holding a megaphone. It was Silas Vance, and he was smiling. The feedback from the megaphone screeched through the storm, a jagged electronic tear that made everyone in the darkened diner flinch. "Can you hear me in there?" Silas Vance's voice was distorted, metallic, but the menace was crystal clear. It cut through the glass, through the wind, and settled into the bone-deep cold of the room. Cole stood by the window, pressed against the wall. Through the slats of the blinds, he saw Silas standing in the glorious, arrogant illumination of 3 high-beam headlights. He was cradling his broken arm against his chest, the cast white and stark against his dark jacket, but his other hand held the megaphone like a weapon. Behind him, shadowy figures moved, more than 4 this time. Iron Sons. The whole pack had come down from the mountain. "I know you're listening, Lou," Silas continued, his voice echoing off the brick facades of the empty street. "And I know you got that drifter in there. The one who thinks breaking my arm is a polite introduction." Inside the diner was a vacuum of fear. The only sound was the rattle of the windows in their frames. "Here's the deal," Silas said, his tone shifting to a mock-reasonable cadence that was far more terrifying than his anger. "The road's blocked. No cops are coming. Nobody is coming. It's just us in the cold. I don't want to hurt good people. I just want the man and the dog." Cole felt the eyes of the room shift toward him. He didn't look back. He kept his gaze on the street, calculating angles, distances, kill zones. "Send him out," Silas yelled, the amplification cracking. "Send the dog out. And the rest of you? You walk away. I'll even pay for the door he broke. But you keep him in there, and I burn that place to the foundation with you inside." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on Cole's shoulders. He knew this calculation. It was simple arithmetic. 1 life for 6. A soldier for civilians. He had made this trade a dozen times in his head before. He turned slowly to face the room. Gunnar was at his heel, a silent shadow, sensing the tension but waiting for the command. "He's right," Cole said. His voice was low, devoid of emotion. "They have the numbers. They have the firepower. If I stay, they breach. If I go, you live." He looked at Sarah, the waitress, whose face was pale in the gloom. He looked at Lou, the owner, who was clutching a heavy cast-iron skillet like a shield. "Unlock the front door," Cole said. I'll go out. Give me 10 seconds to clear the porch, then lock it behind me. He moved toward the door, his hand resting on Gunner's head. It was the only way. He'd draw their fire, maybe take 2 or 3 with him before they put him down. It was a good death. Better than freezing in a truck. No. The word was quiet, but it hit the room like a hammer. Cole stopped. He turned. It was Lou. The balding, trembling man who had been terrified an hour ago was standing behind the counter. He wasn't shaking anymore. His knuckles were white on the handle of the skillet, but his jaw was set. Lou, Cole warned, you don't know what these men do. I know exactly what they do, Lou snapped, his voice rising. They've been doing it for 5 years. Taking our money. Scaring our kids. Running this town like a prison camp. He stepped out from behind the counter. You're the first person to ever hit back. You think if we give you up, they'll just let us go? Silas Vance doesn't leave witnesses. He leaves lessons. He's right, Sarah stepped forward. She wiped a tear from her cheek, leaving a smudge of dirt, but her eyes were fierce. They cornered me. You stopped them. If we throw you out there, we're just as bad as they are. One by one the others moved. The old men at the counter slid off their stools. The couple from the booth stood up. They weren't soldiers. They were terrified. But they were moving toward Cole, not away from him. They were forming a wall. Cole looked at them, really looked at them. He saw the fear, yes. But he saw something else, something he hadn't seen since his platoon in the sandbox. He saw the line. The line that says, this far and no further. You realize, Cole said softly, that if we do this there is no going back. Tonight ends in blood. It started in blood, Lou said. Might as well finish it. Cole felt a strange tightness in his throat. He nodded once. He didn't say thank you. Words were useless now. He turned back to the window. He didn't use a megaphone. He didn't need one. He grabbed the blinds and ripped them down, exposing the dark interior to the blinding light outside. He stood there, fully visible, flanking the locals. Then Lou walked up to the glass and flipped the sign from open to closed. Outside, Silas lowered the megaphone. The smile dropped from his face. He looked at the defiant faces in the window, the waitress, the cook, the old men, and the ghost in the jacket standing center stage. Silas turned to the shadows behind him and made a slashing motion across his throat. All right, Silas screamed, his voice raw without the amplification, carrying over the wind. Have it your way. He walked back to the largest truck, a massive lifted beast with a reinforced steel brush guard. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural bellow that shook the glass in the frames. Cole watched the truck back up, gaining distance, lining up directly with the front entrance. Get back. Cole shouted, tackling Sarah and rolling her behind the counter. Everyone down. Incoming. The truck didn't slow down. It accelerated, tires spinning on the ice, turning the heavy machine into a missile aimed straight at the heart of the diner. The world didn't end with a whimper. It ended with the shriek of tearing metal and the roar of a V8 engine. The truck hit the front of the diner at 40 miles an hour. The plate glass didn't shatter. It disintegrated, turning into a diamond mist that filled the air before the brickwork gave way. The front wall exploded inward. Dust, snow, and chunks of masonry blasted through the room like shrapnel. The heavy oak table Cole had wedged against the door was splintered into toothpicks as the truck's grill plowed through the entryway, coming to a shuddering, steaming halt halfway into the dining area. For a second, there was only the hiss of a ruptured radiator and the groaning of settling debris. Then the night erupted. Get them? Silas Vance's voice screamed from the street, raw and manic. Figures swarmed over the hood of the truck, silhouetted against the headlights. Muzzle flashes bloomed in the swirling snow, strobe lights of violence. Bullets chewed up the counter, sending showers of sparks and formica flying over the heads of the civilians huddled below. Cole didn't flinch. He didn't return fire. He didn't have a gun. He had the dark. As the first 2 men vaulted off the truck's hood, boots crunching on glass, Cole moved. He slid over the top of the booth, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. He didn't run, he flowed. Gunner up. The command was lost in the gunfire, but the dog heard it. Gunner launched from beneath the overturned table, a sable missile intercepting the first gunman. The man screamed as 75 pounds of fury hit him mid-stride, jaws locking onto his forearm. The shotgun he was holding clattered across the floor. The second man turned, distracted by the scream. That was his mistake. Cole stepped into the light of the truck's headlamps for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the man to see death coming. Cole caught the barrel of the man's rifle, diverting it toward the ceiling as a 3-round burst blew out the overhead lights. In one fluid motion, Cole drove the heel of his palm into the man's chin, snapping his head back, then swept his legs. The man hit the debris-strewn floor hard, and Cole silenced him with a precise strike to the temple. He grabbed the fallen rifle, checked the chamber, and melted back into the steam rising from the truck's engine. The diner was a chaotic swirl of snow, smoke, and shouting. The Iron Sons were shooting at shadows, their discipline unraveling in the face of resistance they hadn't expected. Cole moved through the gaps, a phantom in the haze. He flanked the truck, coming up on the driver's side. A third man was trying to pry the driver's door open, shouting for backup. Cole didn't waste a bullet. He used the rifle stock, driving it into the man's ribs, collapsing him. "Where is he?" Silas screamed, stepping through the hole in the wall, a heavy revolver in his good hand, his eyes wild, scanning the carnage. "Show yourself, coward." Cole stepped out from behind the steam 10 feet away. He didn't raise the rifle. He let it hang by his side. "I'm right here," Cole said. Silas spun, bringing the revolver up. But his movement was clumsy, hindered by his cast and his rage. Cole dropped the rifle and closed the distance. He didn't want to shoot Silas. He wanted to break him. Silas fired once, a wild shot that shattered a coffee pot on the back counter. Before he could cock the hammer again, Cole was inside his guard. Cole batted the gun hand aside with his left forearm and drove a right cross into Silas's jaw. The sound of the impact was wet and heavy. Silas stumbled back, tripping over a pile of bricks. He lashed out with his cast, a desperate, heavy swing. Cole ducked under it, the plaster grazing his shoulder, and drove his shoulder into Silas's chest, lifting the big man off his feet and slamming him onto the hood of his own truck. Silas wheezed, the wind knocked out of him, the revolver skittering away across the hood. He looked up, dazed, to see Cole standing over him. There was no anger in Cole's eyes. Only the terrifying, cold indifference of a professional. "You wanted a war," Cole whispered, leaning in close. "You got one." Cole grabbed Silas by the lapels of his jacket and hauled him up, then swept his leg, driving him face first into the snow and glass covering the floor. He wrenched Silas's good arm behind his back, applying pressure until the joint screamed. "Stay," Cole commanded. The firing had stopped. The remaining Iron Sons, seeing their leader broken and pinned in the wreckage, hesitated. They looked at the dark corners of the room where the dog was growling over a fallen man. They looked at the ghost standing over their boss. And they looked at the shotgun Cole had kicked toward the counter, where Lou, the terrified diner owner, had picked it up and was pointing it at them with shaking but determined hands. The fight went out of them. They backed away, hands raising slowly, surrendering to the cold and the man who owned it. Cole didn't let Silas up. He kept his knee between the man's shoulder blades, his gaze scanning the breached wall, the snow blowing in to cover the blood. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving the sharp sting of cuts and bruises. Cole took a breath, the freezing air burning his lungs. It was over. The siege was broken. But as the wind shifted, carrying the sound of sirens rising in the distance, faint but getting louder, Cole looked down at the blood on his hands. The police were coming. The law was finally climbing the mountain. Cole stiffened. He was a man with a past that didn't play well with flashing lights. He looked at Gunner, then at the back exit where the snow was piling up. He had saved the town, but as the first blue lights reflected off the storm clouds, he realized he might have just trapped himself. The silence that followed the violence was heavier than the storm. It wasn't the silence of holding your breath. It was the silence of exhaling after a long, terrible scream. The wind outside, which had been battering the mountains for 12 hours, finally began to drop. The snow stopped falling in sheets and drifted down in lazy, sparse flakes, like the last embers of a dying fire. Cole stood amidst the wreckage of the diner's front wall. Glass crunched under his boots with every shift of his weight. He looked down at Silas Vance, who was zip-tied with electrical cords Lou had pulled from the back office, groaning in the snow. The other Iron Sons sat in a dejected row against the counter, watched over by Gunner, whose amber eyes hadn't blinked in an hour. Blue lights flashed against the snow-covered pines, a rhythmic, pulsing strobing that grew brighter with every passing second. The sirens, once a distant wail, now filled the valley, echoing off the canyon walls. Cole felt the old itch in his legs, the instinct that had kept him alive for years. Move, evade, disappear. When the authorities arrived, questions followed. And men like Cole, men who carried the kind of violence he had just unleashed, didn't do well with questions. He adjusted his jacket, his hand brushing the bruises on his ribs. He looked at the back exit, the gap in the darkness where he could slip away before the first cruiser skidded into the lot. He took a step toward the shadows. "Coffee," a voice said. Cole stopped. He turned. Lou was standing there holding a fresh mug. His hand was steady now. He wasn't the terrified old man hiding behind a grill. He was a man standing in his own castle. "It's fresh," Lou said, extending the cup. "On the house. For as long as you want it." Cole looked at the cup, then at Lou's eyes. He expected to see fear. He had just broken 3 men in half with his bare hands. He was a weapon. People were supposed to be afraid of weapons. But Lou didn't look afraid. He looked grateful. "You don't have to go," Sarah said, stepping out from the kitchen. She was holding a towel to a cut on her forehead, but she was smiling. A tired, shaky smile, but a real one. "They aren't coming for you, Cole. They're coming for them." She pointed at Silas. The first state trooper SUV fishtailed into the lot, followed by 2 sheriff's deputies. Car doors slammed. Erratic beams of flashlights cut through the gloom. Voices shouted commands. "Hands? Let me see hands." Cole didn't run. He took the coffee. When the troopers stormed through the shattered front of the diner, weapons raised, they didn't find a hostage situation. They found a town standing shoulder to shoulder. The questioning was chaotic but short. When the sheriff, a man who had been trying to pin Silas Vance for years, looked at Cole, he didn't see a suspect. He saw the testimony of 6 witnesses who all told the same story. The stranger didn't start it. He finished it. "He saved us," the old man at the counter said, pointing a trembling finger at Cole. Simple as that. By the time the ambulances were loaded and the tow trucks arrived to drag the battering ram out of the dining room, the sun had begun to crest over the eastern ridge. It was a brilliant, blinding gold. The light hit the snow and turned the world into a field of diamonds. The darkness of the storm, the claustrophobia of the siege, it all evaporated in the clean, cold air of the morning. Cole walked out onto the porch, or what was left of it. The air was sharp and clean. He took a sip of the coffee. It was hot, strong, and tasted like life. Gunner trotted up beside him, his tail giving a rare, slow wag. The dog leaned his heavy head against Cole's thigh, letting out a long sigh that seemed to release the tension of the entire night. Cole reached down, burying his hand in the thick fur behind the dog's ears. "We did good, buddy," Cole whispered. He looked at his truck, still parked in the lot, covered in a foot of snow. He had planned to be 300 miles away by now. He had planned to be a ghost again, haunting the highways, moving from one dark place to another. But then Lou walked out, a broom in his hand, already starting to sweep the glass. He looked up at Cole and nodded. A simple, silent acknowledgement. "Neighbor." Cole looked at the mountains. They were rugged, dangerous, and beautiful. They were a place where you could get lost, or a place where you could be found. He realized then that the silence he had been looking for wasn't out on the road. It wasn't in running away. It was right here, standing between the monsters and the innocent. Cole Hendricks took another sip of coffee and watched the sun rise over Blackwood Ridge. He wasn't going anywhere. "Come on, Gunner," Cole said, his voice lighter than it had been in years. "Let's see if we can help them fix that door." The ghost was gone. The guardian remained. 4 years the world looked right through Cole and Gunner like they were ghosts, leaving them out in the cold while everyone else stayed warm. If you scroll past this video without liking or subscribing, you're just another person walking away and leaving them in the dark. Don't be the one to ignore a hero. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and finally give them the welcome home they deserve.